Welcome to Canadian Passages, a project that brings history to life with audio versions of archival material. These audiograms use digital voices to make historical writings accessible anytime, anywhere. The materials in this series come from the archives of the Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt, Naval and Military Museum. Please be warned that this content may contain language considered inappropriate by today's standards. The material is a product of its time and represents the context of the era, as well as the attitudes and opinions of those who created it. In the interests of historical integrity, editing has been done for clarity or brevity only, rather than for censorship. Roland Richard Bourke was born November 28, 1885 in London, England. Roland's father, Dr. Isidore McWilliam Bourke, a Victorian gentleman adventurer, left for the Klondike Gold Rush in 1897, and the family followed. Roland arrived in Canada with his mother and sisters in 1902. In Dawson City, Yukon, the family managed a hotel, hospital, and mining claims. As the gold rush waned, Isidore moved his family to Nelson, British Columbia, where they took up fruit farming. In 1907, Roland's eyesight was permanently damaged and his cousin was fatally injured while using explosives to clear tree stumps on the farm. After war was declared, Roland tried to enlist in the Canadian Army, Navy, and Air Service, but in 1915 he was rejected because of his impaired vision. Undeterred, he traveled to England in 1916 and talked his way into the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, where he was assigned to motor launches, often crewed by Canadians. He spent a year assigned to Larne, Ireland, but then transferred to the frontline base at Dover. Despite his defective vision, Roland's heroism at Blockship Raids in 1918 earned him Victoria Cross and Distinguished Service Order medals. Some of Roland Bourke's papers and photographs are in the collections of the CFB Esquimalt Museum. Amongst these are stories and letters relating his First World War experiences. A transcript of a letter written by Roland Bourke to his half-brother John in October 1918 is in the CFB Esquimalt archives. The letter describes the Blockship Raids that garnered Distinguished Service Order and Victoria Cross medals for Roland while he served in the RNVR. Bourke had been assigned to motor launches as a sub-lieutenant, but was promoted to lieutenant in command of His Majesty's Motor Launch 341 at Larne, Ireland. In November 1917, he transferred to Dover, taking command of Motor Launch 276. Dover in England, and Dunkirk in France, functioned as a single tactical unit for the Dover Patrol. Dover was the administrative and logistical heart, as well as the primary repair yard and safe harbor behind the Dover Barrage, a massive anti-submarine net and mine system. Dunkirk was the frontline springboard as it was significantly closer to the German-occupied Belgian ports. By 1918, Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare was close to starving Britain into submission. The inland Belgian city of Bruges served as a massive protected nest for German U-boats and destroyers. The blockship operations in the spring of 1918 were designed to obstruct the Zeebrugge and Ostend channels with obsolete ships, packed with concrete and rubble. The April 23 operation had been partially successful at Zeebrugge. But at Ostend, the ships did not reach their target. So in May, they tried again. In a lecture tour after the war, Bourke explained that all the sailors who participated in the blockship attacks had volunteered for the operations, even though they'd been told they were suicide missions. This passage of the letter covers the Ostend raid of May 9, 1918, but begins immediately after the April operation.
Motor Launch 276, Dover, 11th of October 1918. Commander Ben invited several officers and myself to have dinner with him. After an excellent dinner, as Commander Ben told me he did not expect any further operations, I proposed putting in for my Canadian leave, to which he agreed. The next day I went to Dover on 24 hours leave and met Commander Ben, who much to my surprise informed me that HMS Vindictive was to be used to block Ostend. I, of course, at once volunteered for rescue work, especially as Commander Gaudsel had volunteered to go in again with Vindictive. However, Sub-Lieutenant Young and my crew did not care to volunteer again, and the senior officer Dunkirk reported my motor launch was too damaged for the work. So the commanding officer and crew of Motor Launch 254 who volunteered were chosen. There was, however, a vacancy on 254 as first lieutenant. So I volunteered to waive my command and go with her in that capacity. We stood by at Dunkirk for about a week whilst the tides were right, awaiting a favourable wind. During this period, I stood by as Drummond 254's first lieutenant and did everything I could to get her in good shape for the fray. The wind did not prove favourable, so we all returned to Dover and had a few days' leave. On returning from leave, I was informed I must not go as Drummond's number 1, but might act as standby if I could get my motor launch in shape in time. This was giving me 24 hours notice. And as I had stripped my motor launch for motor launch 254, and my dynamo was out of action, it was not giving me much time. Anyway, I got together all the gear, such as rope mattresses, shrapnel helmets, Lewis guns, etc., etc., and also got the dynamo from another launch which was out of action. Also a complete new volunteer crew gathered from here and there, and was ready on time and crossed to Dunkirk. We then had motor launches 254 and 128 as rescue, and motor launches 283 and 276 as standby. The fleets left Dunkirk as before and carried on smoking till Vindictive arrived. As Vindictive went inshore, motor launch 128 rescue and motor launch 283 standby failed to find her in dense smoke. Consequently, there was motor launch 254 rescue and motor launch 276 standby with her as she went in. On account of thick smoke and mist, Vindictive got within 1/4 mile of the piers without seeing them. And Commander Gaudsel, rather than risk putting his ship aground outside harbour, turned and manoeuvred.
The Dover Patrol Captain, Sir Ion Hamilton Benn, 1st Baronet, was the commander of a flotilla of motor launches in the Dover Patrol for 3 years during the First World War. Benn's wartime service was recognized with the Distinguished Service Order, appointment as a Companion of the Order of the Bath and the Croix de Guerre. His motor launches played a major role in the spring 1918 raids by creating chemical smokescreens and rescuing crews from the blockships. As noted earlier, these operations were completely crewed by volunteers. Lieutenant Alexander McBain Young, a Canadian from British Columbia, had been Bourke's first lieutenant on motor launch 276 during the April Ostend raid. But he chose not to participate in the May operation. He not only survived the First World War, but served in the Second as well, dying in Prince George in 1950 at age 55 from natural causes. HMS Vindictive, an Aragon-class cruiser launched in 1897, had been involved in the April 1918 blockship operation. Heavily damaged by shells at the raid on Zeebrugge, Vindictive was repurposed into a blockship for Ostend the following month. Stripped of weapons and filled with concrete, she was given a volunteer crew of 55 and sent in to block the channel. As the Vindictive approached the Ostend piers, massive heavy shells from inland batteries rained down from miles away, while field guns and rhythmic thumping anti-aircraft pom-poms shredded her superstructure at point-blank range. A relentless blizzard of machine gun fire and snipers came from the piers, all illuminated by the blinding flickering glare of German searchlights cutting through the artificial smoke.
For close on 40 minutes, Commander Gaudsel manoeuvred his vessel in this shoal water. Sometimes the searchlights got him, and the guns opened on him at point-blank range. He would dodge into a smoke bank, and the batteries continued to put down a barrage. Finally he found the harbour, and put her right in between the piers and started to turn her. Although the shell fire, pom-pom, and machine gun fire were terrific, Commander Gaudsel left the armoured conning tower in order to see better in the smoke. A shell struck the conning tower at this moment and killed him in the hour of achievement. He was one of the finest men I have had the honour of meeting, and I greatly regret his death. The smoke was so thick that in following the Vindictive, I got to the east of the eastern pier and had to turn and go round to the other side. In the meantime motor launch 254 had gone to Vindictive and got her crew. As I went in, she came out and I shouted to know if they had everyone. Crutchley, on whom the command had developed when Gaudsel was killed, answered yes, he had. But I did not hear him. I thought someone might have been overlooked, so went into the harbour and turned, shouting to see if I could get a reply. We thought we heard someone, but could not be sure. And then as we heard nothing, started out of harbour. And again we thought we heard someone, so put back. We could not however locate where the shouting came from, and thought it might be the wily Hun trying to detain us till we were quite done in, so started out again. We started to leave the harbour 3 times altogether before we finally located Lieutenant Sir John Allen and 2 seamen in the water, hanging to the end of an upended boat. We manoeuvred alongside and got them, and started out of harbour, full speed, both engines. Just as we left the harbour, my compressed air tank was shot away. If this had happened a minute earlier, we could not have started our engines. Previously a 6-inch shell had passed through my dinghy and exploded overboard, but of course rendered the dinghy useless, so we certainly would have been done in.
Alfred Edmund Godsall, Distinguished Service Order, Croix de Guerre, had served on a variety of ships in the Mediterranean, West Indies, and China Station, and by 1914, was an elite officer. Godsall was promoted to commander at the age of 32, and volunteered for the blockship operations. He commanded HMS Brilliant in the first Ostend raid on April 23, and HMS Vindictive in the second Ostend raid on May 9. As in the previous operation, the ship was manned entirely by volunteers, mostly drawn from the crews of HMS Brilliant and HMS Sirius. Godsall was killed in the early hours of May 10. Victor Alexander Charles Crutchley was a career Navy officer with ties to the British monarchy. By 1918, he was already a veteran. Crutchley eventually rose to admiral in the Second World War and was knighted for his service. Due to the damage experienced in the April blockship operation, Vindictive was repurposed as a blockship for the second attempt to seal the Ostend harbor entrance. Hastily prepared, she sailed with another cruiser, HMS Sappho, intended as a second blockship. But Sappho had to turn back due to engine trouble. Vindictive was guided in part by flares and supporting motor launches under heavy German fire and challenging conditions, including smoke, mist, and strong defenses. Captain Godsall aimed to position her broadside across the channel to block it effectively. However, intense shellfire, which worsened the previous damage suffered at the Zeebrugge raid, disabled her port propeller and steering. She was sunk at an angle, only partially obstructing the channel. German forces could still use the channel with some difficulty, but it was a bold and costly effort that boosted British morale. Most of her skeleton crew was evacuated by motor launches. British casualties were relatively light compared to the earlier Zeebrugge raid with 8 dead, 10 missing and 29 wounded.
My steering hand had been killed at the wheel next to me, and another of my 4 deckhands killed. Sub-Lieutenant Petrie, my volunteer lieutenant, acted splendidly throughout the operation. When the landing hand was killed, Petrie immediately took the wheel, and only relinquished it when I gave the orders to open fire on the piers with Lewis guns. He then, among other things, shot all the glass out of the lighthouses on each pier. Later, Petrie was the first, when we located the men in the water, to jump down and help to get them aboard. This was all under heavy machine gun fire and pom-pom fire. Later, he did good work looking after the gassed and wounded men. My port acid tank had again been pierced, and as my water hose had been shot away, I could not sluice acid overboard. So that about 2 hours after leaving Ostend, it had eaten its way through the deck into the after cabin, and on contact with water in the bilges, started to smoke. Lieutenant Allen was on the bed in the after cabin, badly wounded, so I went below to get him up before he was gassed. At this minute, a monitor was reported, so I decided to go alongside and put my wounded and gassed men aboard her. I went alongside her blister, and her men waded over, carrying the surgeon who superintended the removal of the wounded, slung in stretchers. We then had to be towed on account of having no air to start engines again. We arrived at Dunkirk at 6:30 a.m., and again I was not sorry as I had been on the bridge 12 hours and had nothing to eat. All my remaining men had to go to hospital, gassed, but Sub-Lieutenant Petrie and I were all right. I had, after leaving Ostend, insisted on everyone being sick, as this is a great safeguard against results of poison gas. Luckily, there was no one to insist on my being sick, so I escaped that inconvenience. On examination, I found that I had more than 55 holes through my motor launch, including 16 through the wheelhouse. A brother officer gave me breakfast, then I had to attend on the Commodore till noon while he made out his report. It hardly seemed worthwhile to go to bed then, so I did not turn in till the evening after a strenuous 48 hours without sleep. Drummond, commanding officer of the 254, was wounded, and Ross, his first lieutenant, killed, and another man killed. After he had put his survivors on the destroyer Warwick, his motor launch had to be destroyed as it was in a sinking condition.
Roger John Keyes, 1st Baron Keyes, GCB, KCVO, CMG, DSO, was commander of the Dover Patrol in 1918. Famous for altering tactics that resulted in the sinking of 5 U-boats in a month, he orchestrated the Zeebrugge Ostend Raids. As first director of combined operations in the Second World War, he was instrumental in the formation of the British Commandos. At the May Ostend Raid, Geoffrey Drummond was the commanding officer of Motor Launch 254. As he reached the Ostend pierheads, a shell exploded on his boat, killing his second-in-command, Lieutenant Gordon Ross, and a deckhand, and severely wounding the coxswain. Drummond himself was wounded in the head and legs by shell splinters. Despite his severe injuries and the fact that his boat was sinking, he successfully maneuvered alongside the Vindictive. He stayed on the bridge and oversaw the evacuation of 2 officers and 38 men. He then navigated the overcrowded and damaged launch, out to sea, away from the German searchlights and batteries. He remained conscious and in command until he reached the safety of the offshore destroyer HMS Warwick, at which point he collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss. He survived the war, but died in 1941, due to a fall caused by the leg injuries he suffered during the Ostend raid. The destroyer HMS Warwick, Admiral Keyes' flagship during the blockade, was commanded by Captain Victor Campbell. After surviving Scott's Antarctica expedition in 1911, Campbell served at Gallipoli, and then in May 1917 sunk a U-boat by ramming it. While navigating through the German-laid minefields outside Ostend, Warwick struck a mine, which nearly broke her in two. In a feat of seamanship often cited in naval history, the destroyer HMS Velox lashed herself to the side of the crippled Warwick and towed her across the English Channel. For his gallantry during the First World War, Campbell was awarded a DSO and 2 bars. In his further service with the Royal Navy, he reached the rank of captain. The actions of James Petrie, temporary sub-lieutenant, Bourke's first officer and second-in-command of HMML 276, were critical to the success of the rescue. For his conspicuous gallantry, Petrie was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Petrie returned to Scotland for a few years after the war, then moved to Hong Kong where he founded the Hong Kong Naval Volunteer Force in 1933.
Well, I again put in for my leave shortly after this affair, and it was granted. The Vice Admiral at Dover hinted at a decoration, and expressed surprise at my wishing to go away at this time. I told him I did not wish to wait for decoration, but would stop if they had anything else into Ostend. They had not, so I went on leave. I had splendid weather on the way over and across Canada, and no accident occurred of an exciting character. A few hours after I left Nelson on my way back to England, a cable arrived saying I had been gazetted Distinguished Service Order for rescue of Brilliant's crew and of Motor Launch 532 in the April 23rd raid. Shortly after my arrival back in England, I was gazetted Victoria Cross for rescue from the Vindictive. I forgot to say I was promoted Lieutenant Commander just before leaving for Canada. Recently I was decorated by the King with Victoria Cross and Distinguished Service Order, and had the honor of being the first of the 300 officers and men decorated. Lieutenant Drummond also received the Victoria Cross for his rescue. I have been back on duty now for several months and hope the war will end soon. I am fed up with the monotony and no signs of excitement. P.S. Of course, please don't let any of this get into the papers.
Vindictive's wreck remained visible at Ostend, post-war. Her bow was later preserved as a memorial, and the May raid is marked each year in Ostend as Vindictive Day. Bourke's wish for the war to end would come on the 11th of November, only a few weeks after he wrote the letter. In the letter, Bourke also described details of his 5-week visit to his family and friends in Canada, including his engagement to be married. For his conspicuous gallantry during the April raid, King George V pinned the Distinguished Service Order medal onto Bourke's uniform, in the forecourt of Buckingham Palace, on the 25th of July 1918. During this period of the war, the King often held open-air investitures to accommodate the large number of recipients, and as a security measure against air raids. For the May raid, King George V decorated Bourke with the Victoria Cross on the 16th of January 1919, in the ballroom of Buckingham Palace. This was a more formal indoor ceremony held after the armistice. Historical accounts of the day note that the king took a few moments to speak personally with each VC recipient. This must have been a particularly significant moment for a Canadian RNVR volunteer in a room largely filled with regular Royal Navy and Army officers. Roland Bourke has been referred to as the bravest of all holders of the Victoria Cross for his extraordinary rescue missions during the blockship operations of 1918. For his gallantry, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, Distinguished Service Order, French Legion of Honor, and Croix de Guerre. Following the war, he and his new wife embarked on a lecture tour about his war experience, traveling through Australia and New Zealand, before returning to farm in Nelson, British Columbia. Roland moved to Esquimalt in 1932 to take up a job at the Canadian Forces Base. As another war loomed, he was instrumental in creating the Fishermen's Reserve, known as the Gumboot Navy, and was called to active service with the Royal Canadian Naval Volunteer Reserve in 1939. Though his eyesight prevented him from combat duties, he reached the rank of acting commander and held critical shore appointments. He retired in 1950 and was buried with full military honors when he died in 1958. Museums and archives offer a wealth of primary sources such as those featured in this audiogram. These materials provide a spotlight on historical events and social history not found elsewhere. Letters and diaries, particularly, offer personal insights into the past. The Canadian Passages Project hopes to make unique materials held by CFB Esquimalt Museum more accessible to audiences around the world. This audiogram was produced by K.M. Lowe in collaboration with CFB Esquimalt Naval and Military Museum, which, unless otherwise noted, holds all rights to the original materials. This content, including but not limited to recordings, commentary, and images, is protected by Canadian and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved. No part of this production may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted without prior written permission from the copyright holder, but links to the official version may be shared. For more information on this project, please visit canadianpassages.ca. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe for more content like this.